Life is inherently unfair. Some people are born surrounded by love and abundance, but there are also those whose fates are crushed by life from the moment they cry for the first time. Today, we will learn and share a haunting story, the journey of mother and daughter, Tieu Huyen and her little daughter Maya, small people who have had to live amidst misfortune, loneliness, and despair in a society that seems civilized but is too cold. Not just a story. This is also a choked cry for help from forgotten lives, a mirror reflecting the dark side of things that we often try to avoid. Let me follow every trace, every crack in their lives, to understand, to sympathize, and to never turn away from the truth. Nga had just turned 18, still a child not old enough to understand what adulthood really meant when she was forced into marriage. She thought love and family would bring her safety, maybe even happiness. But what she walked into wasn't a home. It was a nightmare that seemed to never end. Her husband wasn't a protector. He was violent, hot-tempered, and cruel a man who took out his rage on the fragile body of a young girl who had no way to fight back. It was a quiet morning, but somewhere else far from our daily routine, a terrified teenage girl was crying silently, running away from a man who had sworn to love her, but instead planned to sell her. Just when all hope seemed lost, Xiao Xuan appeared like a miracle in human form. She didn't hesitate. She knew the danger even when her own ex-husband threatened her. Without hesitation, she took Nhi into her home and led her to safety. That night, under the low roof of a small but warm bamboo house, the two sat side by side. At first, no words were spoken, just silence. Then tears fell. "I know," Tieu Huyen whispered, her gaze drifting to the darkness beyond the wall. "I've held it in for too long." Nhi looked down, her voice choked. "I'm afraid of him. He's a monster." Their pain needed no explanation. Two women, two different lives, but both bore the scars of cruelty, and both had finally found someone who understood them. Meanwhile, back in the village, an old woman sat alone on the porch. Her frail body was hunched over, her eyes clouded with age. She stared down the alley as if waiting for a ghost. "My child? Nga, where are you?" She whispered, her voice trembling barely more than a breath. The illness was eating away at her. Her body was weakening. But every day, she took slow, painful steps to the edge of the alley, hoping to catch a glimpse of the girl who had once called her mother. To outsiders, it looked like she was waiting. But inside that silence was a storm of secrets, pain, and truths that no one was ready to face. The young husband, reckless, cruel, and heartless, was still desperately searching for Nga. But this wasn't the search of a man trying to bring his wife home out of love or guilt. No, this was something far darker. He pushed his way through creeks, climbed over rocks, and slipped through narrow mountain paths. His eyes darted in every direction, his breath quick and shallow. Not from concern, but from desperation. Because deep down, he wasn't trying to save Na, he was trying to cash in on her. Nga, where are you?" he shouted into the stillness of the forest. His voice echoed off the trees, empty and hollow. There was no warmth in his words, only bitterness and deceit. He had no intention of apologizing, no interest in making things right. He wanted to find her so he could sell her, his own wife, a transaction that would fuel his indulgent, decaying lifestyle, and buy more time with the girl he now kept at his side. She was younger, flashier, and in his mind, worth more. "Let's go check back at her mom's place," he said casually, brushing a strand of hair behind the other woman's ear, grinning like he had it all figured out. The smirk lingered, cold, crooked, calculating a mask stretched across his face. The woman next to him, complicit and silent, didn't object. She just gave a faint smile and gently tugged at his hand, motioning for him to sit down by the side of the road. Hours had passed. They were tired, but they weren't done. "Maybe she's hiding somewhere behind the hills," the girl muttered, eyes scanning the horizon as twilight crept over the landscape. "She's a damn good hider," he snapped, then kicked a rock hard, sending it tumbling down a slope. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the world, Nga sat trembling in Tieu Huyen's arms. Her voice was barely a whisper as she told her story, the bruises on her body, the scars that ran deeper than skin, and the chilling truth of what her husband used to whisper in the dark night after night. It wasn't love. It was ownership. And she had finally run away from it. "Sister, I don't want to go back there anymore. I'd rather die than let them sell me like an object. I will not come back. You are here. From now on, you are no longer alone." Tieu Huyen hugged the young girl tightly, her voice resolute. On one side is cruelty and indifference. On the other side is pain comforted by humanity. And ahead is an inevitable confrontation between darkness and light. Nga clutched the warm bowl of porridge in her hands, taking tiny spoonfuls, trying to force something down, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Sister Huyen, I'm scared. I keep thinking he's going to show up here any minute." Her voice cracked, barely above a whisper. Tieu Huyen reached over and gripped her hand tightly. "You're safe now," she said, calm but firm. "You're not alone anymore. I won't let anyone hurt you again. I promise." Meanwhile, miles away, an old woman stood at the doorway of a small, weathered house. Her back was hunched from years of hard labor and heartbreak. She stepped out, then back in, over and over, her gaze fixed down the same narrow alley she'd stared at for days. In her heart, she still held onto hope. Hope that her daughter-in-law would come home. Hope that her reckless son would do something right for once and bring her back safe. Then from a distance, the sputtering sound of an engine echoed through the stillness. A broken-down car rolled slowly into the yard. It barely stopped before the son jumped out, already shouting, "Did that girl come back here or not?" The old woman flinched. Her eyes were cloudy with confusion, her face lined with exhaustion. She said nothing, just sank into the nearest chair as he stormed into the house, tore off his shirt, and growled, "I'm done looking for her. When I find her, I'm selling her off. That's all she's good for." She turned toward him stunned. "You? What are you saying she's worthless? Let someone else deal with her," he barked, kicking the flat tire leaning against the porch. Noticing the broken car, his expression twisted. "Give me money. I need to fix this piece of junk. I'll look for her on the way. Or better, just buy me a new car." Before she could respond, he was already tearing through drawers, flipping blankets, digging through pockets. The old woman stumbled toward him, grabbing his arm. "That's for my medicine. Please, just leave it," she pleaded. But he didn't stop. He ripped the cloth pouch from under the bed, the one she'd hidden little by little, saving over months. "Son, please," she begged, her voice breaking, her frail body trembling as she shuffled after him out into the yard. But he was already gone. The rusted car coughed and clattered down the road, leaving only dust behind. Tears slipped down her wrinkled cheeks, dropping onto the cold tile beneath her feet. In the stillness, she whispered one last time, "Nya, where are you, my child? Please, come home." Nya was overwhelmed with emotion. She didn't want to burden Tieu Huyen or her daughter any longer, so quietly, without saying much, she left. As she stepped away from the house, little Maya came running after her, her tiny feet pattering on the ground, eyes wide with sadness. "Bye, sister." Maya whispered, her voice soft and innocent, carrying a weight far beyond her years. Nga managed a faint smile before turning away, her heart twisting. She walked along the quiet roadside where weeds swayed in the wind and the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cracked pavement. Eventually, her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the edge of the road, tears pooling in her eyes. All at once, the pain surged up, sharp, raw, uncontainable. "Mom," she cried out, sobbing into her hands. "Why? Why did my husband try to sell me? What did I do to deserve this?" The anguish in her voice echoed into the emptiness around her. There was no answer, only the soft rustling of the wind and the distant sound of a motorbike far off in the valley. Nga was just a young woman, barely more than a girl, and yet life had dealt her blow after cruel blow. At just 15, she had been forced into marriage. And now, that same husband, the man who was supposed to protect and cherish her, had betrayed her in the worst way imaginable. She wanted to go home. She wanted to believe there was still a place she could return, to a mother waiting at the doorstep, arms open. But home wasn't safe anymore. Her husband had made sure of that. Now, with no one to turn to and nowhere to go, Nhi walked down the dusty path alone, her clothes worn and torn shoes nearly falling apart. The sun dipped lower in the sky as her silhouette grew smaller and smaller on the road. She didn't know where the journey would end. All she knew was that she had to keep walking.
Chồng đối xử tệ bạc, nhờ có sự giúp đỡ của Tieu Huyen nên cô đã thoát khỏi tay người chồng vũ phu.